Hello, this is my project on USG treaty mechanisms. I focus mainly on the Congressional Executive Committee on China, or the CECC, but I also do devote some time to comparing it to the Commission on Security and Cooperation in Europe, or the CSCE, also known as the Helsinki Commission. So, a little bit of background on the CECC. It was created by Congress in 2000 to monitor human rights and the development of the new rule of law in China. They do this by ensuring compliance with international human rights standards, establishing and maintaining a list of victims and of human rights abuses in China, as well as a list of political prisoners currently being held in China. This information is compiled into an annual report, which is then presented to the President of the United States and Congress, as well as keeping that political prisoner database. The CECC does not impose any standards on China, but rather encourages them through monitoring to conform to global human rights standards. They utilize normative mechanisms to set these norms and advocacy mechanisms to bring violations and information about these standards to public attention. This raised awareness about what's going on in China, then puts pressure on China to conform. The main goal is to promote trade and economics between the US and China. It was originally created to ensure that China is adhering to these labor standards to allow for ethical trading to occur between the United States and China. As for governance, the CECC is governed by American policymakers. It is led by a commission which comprises of 9 senators, 9 members of the House of Representatives, and 5 senior administration officials that are appointed by the President. The current commission can be seen in detail on the right-hand side of the slide. Currently, the 5 executive seats and 1 House seat are vacant. Vacancies are fairly common. This is in part due to a lengthy appointment process to fill those seats, as well as potential political motivations behind the choice of leaving them empty. There's also a small staff of researchers and managers that oversee operations. The CECC is independent of the U.S. government, but it does work bilaterally with China and the United States. The elected officials are extremely important because they influence all partnerships. Partnerships of the CECC are really fluid. They change depending on who these elected officials are, as well as the staff, because they're built off of professional partnerships and relationships of these staff members. There is nothing in the mandate about what partnerships the CECC should hold. So if, for example, one of the representatives has a high number of professional relationships with Amnesty International or the UN or whatever other organization, the CEC will likely work closely with those organizations during the time that that official or staff member is working with the CECC. So it is really important who's in here. That does have a big impact on the partnerships. One of the aspects of the CECC that I found interesting while researching was the political prisoner database. This is a database that tracks information about individuals being held in China as political prisoners. In 2013, there were about 7,300 names, and this has since gone down to about 1,600 names. This is due to escapes, releases, or being killed by the Chinese government. I found the reasoning behind why individuals were being held to be interesting and shocking. It wasn't often due to actual crimes, but rather discrimination or what the Chinese government considered crimes, but really we wouldn't. For example, common reasons included race, religion, or ethnicity, such as being a Tibetan Buddhist, a Catholic, or a Muslim. Those were 3 of the most common I found. Also holding an occupation that could be a threat to the government, such as an NGO worker or a journalist, or again related to religion, if your job was an unofficial religious official, such as a monk or a priest. This is just an example of what the database looks like. Here are 2 individuals. The top is being held by the Chinese government for talking about starting a labor union at work. You can look more in detail there. They have like names, dates, when they were last seen, and the bottom one is being held for practicing Tibetan Buddhism. So the annual report is the main publication of the CECC. It really best shows the work that they do. It draws information from connections with human rights groups, media reports, official government or Communist Party documents. This is the main area where orchestration and collaboration with partners is best seen. Multiple organizations are working within China to gather this information about human rights and human rights violations happening. They then report back to the CECC or their contacts within the CECC to then be published into this paper. It's a pretty long report. It touches on a lot of different topics. Some of them include worker rights, religious freedom, ethnic minority rights, population planning, the status of women, climate change, treatment of North Korean refugees, public health, access to justice, civil society, and democratic governance, and again, there's many more. It is really used as a way to monitor health and social well-being, which is then judged in the terms of human rights. On the right-hand side of the slide, you can see an excerpt from the public health findings of the report. This is just here to illustrate what the findings look like for each topic. This example shows what they evaluate and how they evaluate these human rights. The CECC also covers a lot of other health issues, like the organ trade, mental health of workers, environmental health of workers, and censorship about diseases. This can best be seen through SARS. And these are published in more frequent, less detailed publications throughout the year. These can also be accessed on their website if you're interested in seeing more about those. One of my first questions when beginning research on this topic was, well, what does China think about the CECC? The official website does not indicate much, only that a spokesperson claimed that the CECC is unwarranted interference in China's internal affairs. And after speaking with a former employee of the CECC, the sentiment was further proven. She stated that China is not the biggest fan of this commission. So now moving on, prior to the CECC was the Helsinki Commission. This is a very similarly structured organization that the CECC was actually based off of. The Helsinki Commission was founded in 1976 to monitor human rights across the globe in response to the Cold War and in order to work together to eliminate human rights violations. Like the CECC, it is governed through members of the House of Representatives and senators. And again, like the CECC, it is independent but works closely with the United States government. They also focus on multiple issues, just to name some that are more relevant to public health and discussions that we've had in class. Some of these include migration, refugees, and displaced persons, human trafficking, racism, torture, freedom of speech, and like I said, there are many others. Here are just some examples of the way issues are presented. I chose to show elections because of the deliberate phrasing used. It says, while the vast majority of OSCE participating states generally conduct free and fair elections, in some, notably Russia, Belarus, Azerbaijan, and most Central Asian countries, elections consistently fall short of international democratic standards, and in some cases are a farce. I just thought this was an interesting section to look at given our very unique election period that just occurred in the United States. And they really do make clear that they focus on certain countries rather than others. And just to compare the CECC and the Helsinki Commission a bit more, they are both formed by the United States and are governed by American politicians, so they harbor quote-unquote American beliefs. There is definitely a strong focus on former communist countries. This is stated explicitly on the Helsinki Commission website and can be seen in the way that the CECC monitors to ensure China is creating a new rule of law. There are pretty low levels of transparency. Not much, if any, information about these organizations can be found that is not released by them directly. I think this is due to the fact that they are funded by the United States government, so there are not many stakeholders they need to prove themselves or show themselves to. Both these organizations originated through the lens of economics, trade, and labor. Human rights was then a byproduct of trade, but it does remain a central focus. What I mean by byproduct is that trade was the goal and it could only be achieved if labor standards were being upheld in other countries. And then from human rights, health emerged as a strong indicator. If we look back at examples of issues I gave, like North Korean refugees or energy and the environment, public health can easily be connected. It can really easily be connected to any of the issue areas focused on by these two organizations. Neither of these organizations are really hands-on. Like I mentioned, they set norms, advocate for them, and raise awareness, but they don't act. Their mechanisms can be demonstrated through this COVID-19 report published by the Helsinki Commission. In the report, the Helsinki Commission published what was happening in other countries. For example, if countries were declaring states of emergencies, and it advised other governments on how to respond and how to act, emphasizing continued freedom of media, expression, speech, and information, and released warnings about hyper-surveillance from the government. So through these warnings, but not actual action, I think it's well shown how these organizations respond to issues happening.